2 minutes total. At the request of the speaker will be given 1 additional minute for general public comment for a maximum of 3 minutes total. Members of the public who participate in the public comment are reminded that they can speak to any item on the agenda or a matter within the jurisdiction of the Board of Police Commissioners. Public comment is your opportunity to address the board. So you are free to express your opinion on matters before the board and to generally express when you disagree with other opinions expressed. However, directing your comments to other individuals who have spoken or attacking others who have expressed their opinions shall be deemed off topic and your public comment period will be concluded. Members of the public, if you choose to participate in the public comment portion of the agenda, you can participate in this meeting in a number of ways that are on the agenda. If you simply wish to listen, you can call the phone numbers listed on the agenda. Thank you. At this point, we will turn to item 1 on the agenda, the report of the Chief of Police. Good morning, Chief Moore.
Morning, Commissioner President Briggs, members of the Commission, Mr. City Attorney, Mr. Executive Director, as well as the Assistant Attorney General or Inspector General, Mr. Sibley. As I do each week, I'm going to brief on the COVID-19 update as to its impact within department operations. I'll speak about significant events, crime, and our personnel strength. Regarding the COVID-19 update, this week we've seen a 30% reduction in the number of new cases of COVID-19. This is, as I've said previously, continues to largely match the experience that we're seeing in our surrounding communities relative to this pandemic and particularly the Delta variant. That brings our totals this year, total of the COVID positive cases to 3,036. Sworn personnel are 2,482 and civilians of 554. The number of personnel that are at home recovering from this stand at 168. That's down 19 personnel. And as a reminder, last week's numbers, we had increased the number of personnel at home by 53. So a sharp reduction and significant return of personnel back to the field, back to duty. The total number who returned to duty now stand at 2,856. That's an increase of 71 from last week. The hospitalizations, however, still concern me a great deal. While we had one individual that was successfully discharged and is at home recovering further, we now have a total of 4 hospitalizations. 2 of them are in very, very serious condition, and we're working very closely with our medical professionals and look and hope for and pray for their full recovery. The mobile vaccination did continue through the last week, where we had a total of 98 individuals that took one of the 3 vaccines. Yesterday, that mobile vaccine process continued for the next 5 days. We saw 11 additional individuals take one of the 3 vaccines that are available. I'm also proud of our continued outreach and engagement and work in overcoming the hesitancy that we see amongst a significant number of our staff. And this last week, our chief psychologist, Edward Dorian, penned a op-ed piece, if you will, an opinion piece encouraging all of our members to not be left out, not to stay behind and miss this vaccine, as its protective measures for themselves, their families, as well as for the public in which we serve. I also attended this weekend the Los Angeles Police Protective League delegates meeting, where we have union reps, if you will, from out the city, members of the organization, of sworn members of LAPPL's workforce. And I'm proud of the work of Craig Lally, the president of the league, as well as the group of attorneys, outside counsel, that he brought in to brief the membership on the law relative to employment law and the ability of the city of Los Angeles and by extension, the Los Angeles Police Department to mandate vaccines. It was clear-eyed, it was straightforward, validating that the vaccine mandate is lawful, it is enforceable, and but also with that presentation were the conversations about the value of the vaccine, its importance in saving lives of our personnel, their family, as well as the public. in which we encounter. So this effort continues in our efforts to inform our workforce, while the city also continues to work with labor for the actual implementation of the mandated vaccination process that has been passed by ordinance, and now the mechanics of it are being put in place, and we'll see that coming. We'll see more details on that in the coming days. Moving to my next area, I want to talk about an update on the 28th Street incident involving the accidental explosion of materials that were from the 16 tons of fireworks that were illegally and improperly stored in that residential community. Over the last few weeks, the mayor's office, under their leadership, has tasked the emergency management department to convene a long-term recovery group. So while the initial days and weeks after this unfortunate accident saw the council office, as well as mayor and EMD and this department, rally resources and short-term measures, this long-term engagement is meant to accomplish the following objectives. First, economic recovery, the claim intake, financial assistance, making each individual impacted by this accident, this calamity, whole economically. Second, health and social services, ongoing mental health services, both for adults and children. We're working with the local neighborhood school and ensuring that mental health counselors are readily available, and services are being provided for the entire family in the aftermath of this terrible accident. Housing, we still have some yellow tagged houses. These yellow tag meaning some temporary matters that can be rehabilitated, and that case management on that is to reduce and eliminate all yellow tag conditions with replacement of windows and other temporary repairs. Finally, a joint information system. There is a number of whole of government on this effort, including the police department. We're there, we continue to be there each day and continue to do outreach and engagement with each of the impacted individuals as an opportunity to understand where their case are at, what needs might be. But this joint information system ties all those city departments together, the city attorney's department, the various representatives, to ensure that we do not let individuals slip through the cracks. I've appointed Assistant Chief Kamala and Deputy Chief Labrada, supported by the command at Newton area, to continue to support all of these other city departments, as well as to ensure our presence there is supportive and meets the needs of this community during this trying time. Moving on, the categorical use of force information, there were no categoricals during this recording period. And that brings us to year-to-date numbers as follows. For officer-involved shootings, we've had 25 officer-involved shootings this year. That number year-to-date last year was 19. A total of 9 fatalities this year. That number last year was 6. Our 4-year average of officer-involved shootings is just by this time of year is at 24.50. So it's a between 24 and 25 is a 4-year average. And the number of fatalities is just over 9 on a 4-year average. Regarding our crime pictures, we continue to see the impact, we believe, of shooting violence and homicides, essentially at this point matching the same period last year, which is troublesome in that you see an overall increase of homicides and shooting violence and now resultingly violent crime from this period versus last year, as well as 2 years ago. The specifics on that, gang homicides continue to be a major driver, as does persons experiencing homelessness. Gang homicides are up 31% this year. Shooting violence involving individuals we believe that are involved in the gang lifestyle are up 14%. Homicides involving persons experiencing homelessness as victims has increased 28% this year versus last. Our efforts to identify those responsible and bring them before the criminal justice system continues to see increases, with a 40% increase in the number of homicide arrests this year versus last, an increase in the number of arrests of those involved in aggravated assaults of 3%, and auto theft, which has also been a persistent increase in the property crime arena from this year versus last year and 2 years ago, has increased this year over last year by 11%. The outreach and engagement also continues. I want to thank again our reserve officers who this last week were in the Olympic area and did footbeat and deployments along the Vermont and Wilshire corridor. We also saw footbeats and added deployments by our gang enforcement detail in the downtown central business core. Our efforts going through this summer and into the fall will continue to be to strengthen our enforcement strategies, identifying those who are committing gun violence, making those arrests, weapon arrests are increased more than 80% this year versus last. So those results are being shown in increased numbers. What also critically important is our engagement with our community, with the public at large. The vast majority of individuals in our communities are neither engaged in criminal activity and many times are not involved as victims of violent crime. So having a presence and seeing officers and having the opportunity to engage with them in a conversation about prevention, about efforts to provide for the community safety of everyone are important encounters that these footbeats and these added deployments support. And I'm thankful for operations as well as our reserve officers that bolster those with their participation. Our sworn and civilian staffing numbers have not changed since last week. Our numbers, as far as our reporting numbers, 9,442 sworn, 2,687 civilians. But I am happy and proud to say that we started our third class this year of recruits yesterday, with 60 new recruits entering the academy, which will now help us. It does take 6 months of academy training and development for those who are qualified to then graduate and come into the streets. But this is a marked improvement from where we were 6 months ago, where we saw over the course of an entire year, 79 individuals that were hired. This year and this fiscal year, we've now hired just under 180, and we will continue to solicit and identify those who are qualified and drawn to this professional service, and hopefully find that they apply. We work through their backgrounds and get them in those academy seats so that we can ensure that our staffing is not just maintained at today's levels, but increase to the earlier budget numbers that we've talked about previously. That concludes my remarks, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thank you, Chief. Chief, I know last week that you had mentioned that you were rolling out to all of the stations and roll call, sort of a public service announcement, a series of videos by survivors of COVID, and to help those officers who still have yet to be vaccinated to go ahead and get their vaccinations. I was given the opportunity to review that video, and I'm also glad that it has been made public. I saw something in the news about it, but I just want to reiterate, these were powerful testimonies by individuals who had suffered a severe loss simply because they or their loved ones did not get a vaccine. And the most powerful one was where the mother, who also happens to be in the department, I understand, had just lost her husband. And her child asked her, "Mom, I don't want to lose you. Please get the vaccine." I think that is a powerful testimony to why our officers, who are public safety officers, should go out and all get the vaccine for not only their family members, but for the public whom they serve. And I know, and I'm happy to hear that the union is behind this effort and is doing everything in their power to ensure that the officers receive these vaccines. So I just want to thank you on that note, Chief, for putting that out there and allowing the public to see that video as well. On the 40% increase in arrests for the homicides, my question is whether or not the district attorney is now working with the department to help reduce the number of homicides by taking shooters off of the streets and ensuring that there's not just this revolving door where they come in, they're arrested, and they're released, to go back out and cause harm to the community. Can you comment on that, please?
Certainly. So that is a ongoing development, specifically when it comes to enhancements for gun violence. For instance, in a robbery where a gun is used, I continue to encourage the District Attorney Gascon to file all enhancements that are relevant to the underlying facts and circumstances. And his office has, in some instances, in other instances, they've not. I've seen, for instance, hate crime enhancements that have been filed, but I've also seen gun enhancements on street robberies that were not filed. And I think that is not in our best interest in community safety. We've seen the number of gun-related robberies increase, whether it's the percentages of what makes up a street robbery, the number that involve a gun have increased to more than 20% from earlier numbers of around 10%. So normally in a street robbery, 1 in 10 historically in the last few years have been involving a gun. It's the analysis that we show. Today, that number is above 2 in 10. And so the propensity for individuals to be involved in street violence involving a gun has increased. And I think that the gun deterrence of enhancements serve a role. They serve a role to tell offenders that if you go out and commit a robbery and you use a gun, that you face harsher penalties. And we've seen that change over time. I am encouraged that the District Attorney's Office has assigned DA investigators as well as specific district attorneys, deputy district attorneys, to 3 stations, Newton, Foothill, and Mission, with the expressed purpose of targeting vertically for prosecution gun violence cases. And we will continue to monitor that deployment of those personnel. This is a relatively recent development to see that those individuals are actually in the stations working alongside those detectives and that they are fully prosecuting those cases as the law allows. We need to recognize that in the era of criminal justice reform, that we all, as this department, our men and women and others, look for alternatives, look for diversion, look for opportunities to find people the ability to rehabilitate and bring them successfully back in our community. But individuals that would prey upon others and use guns in the process of doing that are dangerous. We saw just last night deputies in an adjoining area. One deputy was shot. Fortunately, it appears that he will survive as a robbery that occurred in the aftermath. And officers, the deputies attempt to stop that vehicle, what appears from public accounts to be a vehicle pursuit, and then those suspects apparently firing on those deputies, injuring one. And then 3 guns were recovered from that vehicle, again, from published accounts. That level of intensity of added acts of violence, I believe we need to stem that. And that is in part, these are many times hardened individuals carelessly and recklessly engaged in shooting violence. And there needs to be an insurance on the street that there will be real consequences for that conduct.
Thank you, Chief. I have no further questions. Commissioner Soboroff, I see your mic is open.
Sure. Chief, I'd like to get your insights on retaliation deaths. The gang on gang is an epidemic that's not just here, but it's all over urban America. And an inordinate part of gang on gang murders, homicides, are retaliation. The tools to snap that chain of retaliation include gang intervention. Some of the programs that we have internal, but they're also external programs. Which do you think what programs do you think are most effective, and how has our budgetary issues, lack of funding, affected our ability, also just the general service providers' ability to do what they need to do, which is to stop this retaliation. They're big numbers.
So thank you, Commissioner. So the instances of retaliation between gang street violence that is occurring. This past weekend, we saw this in the Newton Street area, where a series of shootings over the last few weeks, we believe is one gang targeting another and going back and forth. Gang interventionists, the faith community, play a significant role, a huge role in trying to meet with those survivors, de-escalate those situations through negotiations and dialogue. And the police department plays a significant role as well in understanding those dynamics and also dispelling rumors. I'm proud of the work of Community Safety Partnership Bureau because one of those areas impacted is in the Pueblos, which is one of their sites, and their outreach and engagement with the community to quell rumors, to settle nerves, and to encourage for us to stop the violence, to stop the needless loss of life is important. The budgetary situation in this area has actually improved. The mayor, as well as city council members, have all pitched in and added significantly to and funded additional gang interventionists and community intervention workers. And so the numbers there are increasing substantially. The pandemic has impacted their ability in some community settings as well as hospitals. But what we continue to do is encourage for those workers to be vaccinated, for those workers to be tested regularly and have access to those services to ensure their safety so that they can be in the street, they can make these encounters and change this back and forth. We've seen with the studying of the GRID process that that work stops retaliations and it saves lives. So I believe that this is not one single issue. This is all of us working together, including the enforcement of identifying those individuals responsible, bringing them before the criminal justice system so that the victims and those friends and associates don't feel that or feel a rationalization or an allowance that they're going to complete street justice because there's an absence of justice within the system.
Thank you, Commissioner Sobroff. Any further questions? Commissioner Kalanche, do you have any questions?
Actually, I do. Thank you. Chief, hello there. About the 27th Street explosion, the recovery group, do you know if, I'm interested in finding out if the group that's been assembled has benchmarks or is it working on that? And is it the mayor's office that's leading it?
So they meet each Thursday and they form a report that is part of the Emergency Management Department's recovery effort. Any type of disaster such as this, we follow the incident management system of recovery and rehabilitation and restoration of services. And in that FEMA style of organization is this long-term recovery group. And it does have benchmarks, it does have case management. And that's why Chief Grimala and Chief Labrada are on those calls to understand. And then the ground truth is that we're also having our senior leads continue to do outreach and engagement with those that are particularly not housed in long-term housing, but have come back to their homes and are waiting repairs. And also we found weeks ago that a number had still not made claims. And in understanding why that was, how do we support that? So it's really continuing. I've heard the public's concerns. So today it was a matter of let me update that this long-term recovery effort is intensive. It's weekly, and it'll continue until we have a full restoration of that community.
Got it. It would be great to have a report on those benchmarks so we know where we're going and if we're successful in meeting the benchmarks. And I know it's not run by you or the department, but it would just be great to have a report or just some feedback on where we're going with the recovery and meeting.
Okay, so we'll at the Commission President's discretion, the department can invite the Emergency Management Department, City Attorney's Office, ourselves to a presentation. A verbal presentation would be my recommendation. I think that and the back and forth there would be helpful to inform you and give you a tenor of what is occurring in that community as we try to restore them back to normalcy.
And get all the information in one place versus like what everybody's hearing. So that would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalanche. Any further questions?
That's it. Thank you so much.
Commissioner Bonner.
Yes, please. Thank you. Morning, Chief. I had two sets of questions, I suppose. One on the discussion, both in your report and the follow-up on the issues of gun violence and shooting. I have a growing interest in a question that was raised in public comment recently and has been raised in some other contexts as well. And spoke briefly last week with some of the command staff in South Bureau as well on the question of what we know about the source of guns coming into the community, and where they're coming from, how young people in particular are getting access to them, and things of that nature. And I understand there's some differing jurisdictional roles of the department on the one hand, and ATF and various agencies that have their various roles and responsibilities. But it's really a request, one, if a brief comment now, if you have it, but also I think more as much to Commissioner Briggs to consider whether we can get a fairly substantive presentation on this issue, on this whole issue of not just the reports on the tail end, the outcome of the level of gun violence, but I'd like to really go back to that first question also of how guns are getting on the streets and what effort is being made there, and what I'm not so. I'm not of the view that that spigot can just be shut off, easily. But there's questions as to whether more can be done to disrupt it and slow it down and things of that nature. So that's just one question or invitation for an observation from you, and as they say, a request that you talk with Commissioner Briggs about whether we can get a presentation appropriately scoped out for a future commission meeting.
I welcome that. Thank you. I think it's an excellent opportunity for Detective Bureau and Gang Narcotics Division to step into this discussion as to the sourcing of weapons. Firearms in the city of Los Angeles come from essentially three sources. One is the transport, purchase, and trafficking from adjoining states that have much looser gun laws. A lack of waiting periods, selling of weapons from trunks of vehicles in parking lots. And so the trafficking of those weapons, that is a significant source. Another one is firearms that are stolen from homes and cars and other people who have possessed firearms. And then there's through a burglary or other type of theft, they result in the wrong hands. And the last is a phenomenon that's been more recently developed in the last few years, and that's what's called this ghost gun, or a manufacturing, if you will, of a gun by assembly of parts that you can buy both through the internet and other sources, and you can essentially build a gun in a garage. The departments work with ATF and with our federal and other state partners are multifaceted on all three fronts. And while and each of them receive varying levels of attention. The last issue is one that we really do not see much, but that we do have to pay attention to, and that's something called a straw purchase, where a licensed gun dealer, an individual will go there, purchase that weapon, and really the effort of that is to then sell it or provide it to someone who's not lawful and they're not lawfully able to possess that weapon. They're a prohibited possessor. That is a less of an issue today than it has been, at least my information as I sit here today, than it was 10 or 15 years ago, because of triggers that we see in California state law for frequent purchasers. People who purchase regular amounts of guns that we believe may just be a straw or an intermediary. But I believe that this is an area that would be very valuable for the commission as well as the public to hear on our strategies, both for awareness, preventive steps that they can take, but also what our efforts are working with our partners to intercede. And you're right, the touch points on this, these are all incremental steps. None of them, not a single effort will stop all of this, but we do believe that we can impact it, and as it is part of our strategic plan to do just that, and not just identify those that are having the guns, but who are the providers. And we believe that those providers, for instance, I've heard the comment, there were complaints, particularly from South Los Angeles, that these guns, who is profiting from this? And we are identifying and arresting individuals, in part by identifying individuals who carry a gun, is to ask them what's the source of that gun, and to trace that back, and then pursue investigations against those manufacturers. Look forward to that presentation.
Well, I appreciate that. And again, I'm going to defer to the chair as well, but I would sure appreciate if we were able to come to terms with both the scope of that presentation and timing so that we can have a further discussion about it. Next question is about going back to the reserve officer contingent that you mentioned. Again, I did receive some of the follow-up information on the questions that I had asked the other day, and we'll be reviewing that. So I appreciate that. But I did have a couple of observations and then either a question or a suggestion. A couple of observations. One is in terms of some of the questions of who are, in that group of the 405 reserve officers. I was under the false impression that that would be a group predominated by former police officers or law enforcement officials. But at least from my early read of the information, that appeared to be about a third of the group, and then a pretty vast cross section of people from various professional backgrounds. So I'm initially assuming that's accurate, but just note that observation. It also appeared to me demographically that the demographics somewhat matched the demographics of the larger workforce, although it appeared to me that it's a pretty light on the female in terms of female representation. So I'd ask you to look at that. And I don't know whether you can comment here, but I don't know whether this is an all voluntary force, meaning that it is what it is in terms of who steps forward, or if there are actually also proactive recruitment and outreach efforts that can that maybe need to be looked at in that regard. But I noted that demographically. In terms of the questions, or a couple of questions, one, there was some information about the deployment, and I don't know that we broke down really the question of the time period that we were looking at, but it did look like there was a fair number. I was a little bit surprised at the number that were deployed in Metro. I think it was about 21. And again, not clear as to over what time period, but just one question I'd ask you here is what that kind of deployment would be in Metro, if you could comment on that. And then the second question, and I think it's probably something that the suggestion for you to look at is in 2015, there was the Inspector General took a look at the reserve officer program. And that was, at that time, it was driven in part by their concern. You'll recall several years ago, there was the situation with the reserve officer in another state that I think it was a 73-year-old reserve officer that shot a young man thinking that he was tasing him and shot him. And that time, part of the focus of that report was just on the qualifications, whether there should be an age requirement, things of that nature. But what I asked last week about the number of the level of involvement in categorical use of force or use of force generally, and that's where I asked somebody to look at what the numbers really are in that area, because in the 2015 report, that as far as I could tell, looked at the period only from a 2-year period from 2013 to 2015, and that report was consistent with what you had kind of just mentioned off the top of your head, which was no involvement in categorical uses of force. But the information that came in since last week said there was 5 over a 20-year period. And so what I'm trying to, and a couple of those were officer-involved shootings. And so it's not clear to me whether that 5 was since 2015 or whether it was before 2013 or something of that nature, but I'd like to get some clarity. And then the last point on that is my understanding, and this is something you can probably tell us right now, is that with the various levels of reserve officers, there was a level 3A, which appeared to be kind of the closest thing to a active duty officer that was armed and carried weapons. And I understand that category has been phased out to some degree, but there are still some 28 or 30 or so people who are grandfathered in, if you will. And the two questions on that: one is, what was the reason for phasing it out? Was it concern similar to what I'm just interested in here in terms of some issue with use of force? But also, why would you grandfather the 28 or so in? Is it, if this were active duty, I would imagine it was a union issue that, there may be a labor agreement or something. But if you could comment on, what's the basis or what's the theory behind grandfathering those individuals in if you phased out that category of officers?
So I think that some of these questions are a little more detailed, and I want to make sure that I'm giving you a full and comprehend and informed conversation. For instance, there were 4 officer-involved shootings, not 5, by your quick recollection. 1 was an in-custody death. The
That's right.
involvement of the reserve officers in that 20-year period in regards to those categorical use of force, it's not clear to me that they were actually involved in the lethal use of force in those 4 instances, or were involved in the tactics. As you know, in a categorical, being involved in a categorical may or may not mean that you were an individual who actually deployed lethal force. Not to argue that this perhaps means that there were 4 officer-involved shootings, that these were 4 individuals that were actually involved in a shooting. I don't have that information yet. So I think that's the follow-up information to tease out what we think we're answering, or what were the facts and circumstances, what were the findings on those cases. Relative to the 3A, this is it is an area that we grandfathered out. I believe it was a combination of changing in post requirements, as well as expectations and changing the department's view of level 3A personnel, that they don't work the field, that what is the utility of having them being armed. But I would just, that's a very top of head response to this. We no longer have it. We did grandfather these individuals in, and I think it's more appropriate to follow up with you with greater detail from our reserve unit within a personal engagement, a public engagement group.
Sure. And by the way, in that 3A, or are any of these officers equipped with tasers, or any less lethal, or are they not using and carrying any weapons?
Well, again, I think the uniform officer working a desk assignment, my expectation that they would be taser equipped, as we would have all of our uniform officers comply with, and that would be my expectation. But let me again, I'd rather prefer to go back to get more details on those follow-up questions, so that I'm accurate.
Right, and just to be efficient, I mean, because to put in context, what I'm focused on a little bit, or one reason I'm continuing to focus, is with the report that you gave last week, where you were noting, I think appropriately, not just the size of the group, but the level of engagement and what they're bringing to the effort. I think roughly speaking, it's almost now about 5% of the workforce that you have available, roughly, right? About 405, I think, is what you've noted. And if you've got about 9,400 or 9,500 sworn officers, so you're talking almost about 5% of the workforce in theory, or at least that's the broad perception. And therefore, there's an interest in understanding really what we know about and how this part of the operation is really working. And as I noted in 15, the issues were around, should there be an age requirement? There was also some questions about the training and the number of hours they were putting in, some of those issues that I would imagine have been addressed in accordance with those recommendations. And I don't have any basis for believing that there's something, awry in the area. So I'm definitely not asking for another IG report or anything. But I think what would be good is again, to just, to reflect on the questions that were kind of kicking around here a little bit, and then determine at some point in a future report, or in some capacity, to maybe just provide a subsequent comment to the commission, whether it's part of the future chief's report or some other context, just so that we can be efficient with the information flow.
Okay.
All right, sure, appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Honor. Before we open it up to public comment, I do want to note that 2 significant events have happened recently. One is the birthday of our executive director, so I simply want to congratulate him on that, Mr. Tiefank, who's been around and has been on the glue for the commission for longer than I've been president, that's for sure. And I know that he's been the backbone of the commission, so I do want to congratulate him on his birthday. And as we just learned today, it is also the birthday of our fellow commissioner, Steve Soberoff. So congratulations to you too. Thank you both. At this time, I'd like to open it up to public comment. Madam Secretary, will you let us know the names?
Okay, our first speaker is caller ending 3146, followed by Zach Sherwin.
Hi, is that me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
5AB, chief, public comment, that kind of stuff.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, again, Native American Lives Matter. See, I'm part Choctaw. See, this is the first tribe to end killing each other. They play lacrosse to end disputes. The most godly people on earth. New topic, fat girl, you're just a dirty fat girl. Sober office like Phil Brock, they hate Native Americans. So no categorical use of force is the #1 objective, right? So then I look at what's happening right now. The public service has a wall up. See, the commissioners are dark and satanic, un-American. You can't see them. It's no transparent, not ethical. Borders on a cover-up and is a crime. It's concealing a government function. It's a crime. I'll get back to you on that. I heard that again. And that's the cam walls. It's the same wall.
Sir, you're off
what you
topic.
do
This doesn't address anything on our topic. So let's go to the next speaker.
Yeah, but
please.
right now you have a docket up, Mr.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Zach Sherwin, followed by Hamid Khan.
Hi. To get 3 minutes, I will disingenuously say that I'm going to address all the items on the agenda.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, great. That bit of bureaucracy is such a farce, and so is allowing 45 minutes for everybody who wants to make public comment to do so. That's also farcical and in direct violation of the stated objectives of this commission on your website. Making people speak before they've heard about the week's meeting agenda items is equally absurd. This is just a joke. It's performative. Your oversight is hollow. And yet I just think, how far would you go if you didn't have people calling in during the week to call you on this bullshit? And so we do it, even though we have to sit there and listen to this lying from Chief Moore, who should have been he should be well into his 2nd year of unemployment at this point. And just this hollow oversight from this commission. If you listen to this call, you would think that the biggest issues in this city are, this violence out there in the community and this torrent of guns. Meanwhile, LAPD is absolutely raging out of control, like COVID is raging around within the department. And commissioners, you just ask these softball questions, and it's nauseating. Do you think you're going to look back at this period in your lives and your careers and just think like, wow, we really did the oversight, asked the tough questions, showed the citizens of the community that we are their voice in police affairs? Like, I literally don't know how you can sleep at night. And I think your very participation in this commission is damning of all of your characters. And I wish I believed, I wish I believed hell was real and that you would join Chief Moore in it. All right, the fireworks. Chief Moore starts out by saying that they were illegally and improperly stored in that community. So go ahead and shift that blame right on over, Chief Moore. And you refer to it as a terrible accident and this accidental explosion. That was not an accident. You called the press to witness it, and your inability to accept responsibility for your ridiculous buck wildness doesn't do much to dispel my belief that you aren't the man for the job you're in. I saw this week, I just watched in slow motion as 2 of your officers driving around with their windows closed, not wearing masks, took a right turn without signaling. And I just thought, no matter what this, quote unquote, slick guy says in this meetings, and needless to say, Chief Moore, at this point that I don't consider you a slick guy who's on top of his job, but you may be able to spew out these talking points in here, but the actions of your officers in the streets and the way they really comport themselves out there in the world speaks volumes. And this commission isn't going to hold you to account. And I'm just disgusted by it because of the lethal consequences that the actions of these people have on the citizens of this city. I'll go ahead and yield the rest of my time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Hamid Khan, followed by caller ending 2992.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. Items would you like to speak on?
All items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
So want to talk about the report back to the Public Safety Committee that the LAPD has filed. And when you look at the 30+ page report, it is interesting that it is such a historical indictment on the failure of this body repeatedly. I mean, Zach Sherwin just talked about it, that how you all act as the shock absorbers for the system, and ultimately you become the apologist who you are for their violence and conspiracies and lies. So when you look at it, and going back to the whole series of lawsuits filed, to the series of trainings that they have gone through a series of arrangements that they have had, and we're not even talking about, you know, the Department of Justice's consent decree that finally took about 12 years to get out of. And here we go again, that it comes back to, and exactly where we've always headed, that the LAPD wants more money, they want to do more training, they want to just, like, you know, go through this, go through that. But still, you know, that it's not sinking into the police commission, and it's also just completely being rejected and neglected. I mean, as one would expect of them, that yes, it is all about abolishing the system. It is about abolishing. We talk about defunding, and, you know, we talk about reforming it, but you can't reform something that is fundamentally flawed by design, that is toxic to its core, and that is going to keep on repeated patterns. So even Bonner, I mean, you seem to be the one that does ask some questions. I mean, you've got to pause for a second and look at this report and see that what direction are we headed again, and where are we going? So we completely reject this thing. I mean, this is, again, just this propaganda. And one thing we want to also tell you very loudly and clearly too, that the uprisings never stop. The uprisings, you know, what the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition has been doing has been engaging in the 24/7 uprising and rebellion by exposing your tactical operations, by letting the world know that this whole pseudoscience and language that you're using around data-driven policing, around laser program, around predictive policing, around chronic offender programs, broken windows, blah, 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 blah. It's just a mask. It is just a facade. It is just a twist on language, which brings me to this whole issue around excited delirium that, you know, that people have been talking about. I mean, this is such a racist trope that we have heard, and we've heard culturally and politically, about the savage native, the criminal Black, the illegal Latino, the manipulative Asian, the terrorist Muslim. And it is clearly this very white supremacist language that gets to be used about this angry Black men, or the Mandingo and all of that. And that's what we need to call out.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller ending 2992, followed by Blue.
Hi, good morning. All items public comment, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. Good morning. Happy birthday, Soboroff. Officers are being doxxed and harassed by members of the group Antifa. They're posting their home addresses and phone numbers on the internet and social media platforms. It is often a constant harassment that these officers are enduring. The Antifa members are lodging frivolous complaints against department personnel with the intention of further harassment. Commissioners, the officers need your help and currently have no recourse. The league can't help them because it's not in the course of their employment. They're harassing officers in their personal lives, and as well as their family members and friends on social media, suggesting that their fellow Antifa members show up at their homes. It is terrifying and disgusting. Officers can't lodge grievances or complaints as they're being harassed off duty. As of right now, they're helpless in this situation and need your help, commissioners. These officers put their lives on the line daily for the rest of us and don't deserve this harassment. Command staff, MRD, Chief Moore, and you, especially commissioners, need to do anything you can to prevent further harassment of LAPD officers and their family members. I support LAPD officers, public safety, and especially Chief Moore, who has an extremely difficult job. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Blue, followed by Q.
Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
I would like all items, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First of all, I want to ask make a point. To those who want to defund the police, I'd love to know what their ultimate vision looks like. Do we think that because LAPD has less funding that the criminals will pull back on their nefarious activities? I'd love to see what a week of defunded LAPD, just to see what a disaster it would be. The LA City budget is a rod of waste and efficiency. The city spends over $11 billion a year. Only $1.6 billion is allocated to LAPD. There is over $9 billion that can be redistributed to address other areas. LAPD should not have to pay for the mistakes of both current and past politicians. We're tired of having our LAPD officers ambushed. Officers are leaving, lowest academy in history. Crime and violence is up dramatically. Last year, the city of Los Angeles recorded more than 300 murders for the first time in more than a decade. When 2020 ended, there had been 343 homicides, a 34% increase from the previous year. This year, the numbers could have been worse. As a matter of fact, half of 2021, homicides continue to climb. There were 179 murders between January 1 and June 30th. This marks 31% increase from the same period last year and a 38% rise from the 129 homicides in the same time frame in 2019. So defunding the LAPD is not the answers. The looting and the rioting and most everything in our streets will not go away. It's a delusional. It's so anti-police and hateful towards cops that this reason is why Los Angeles has become the way it has. As a long-time Angelino, I've never seen Los Angeles so bad. We should make it illegal to shine strobe lights on officers' faces and ruining their eyesight. Pathetic council member Mark Ridley Thomas and Bonin comparing it to flashlights and lights on their cell phone is absolutely disgraceful. But then again, it's not surprising. They're known to be anti-police, defunding the police and police haters. As long as the mayor, who calls our police officers killers, they will get away with this. Phone lights on flashlights are not damaging people's eyesight. Bonin says he can't even turn on the flashlight on his phone. Pathetic. Crime has gone up from a disgraceful district attorney that hopefully won't be in office as long as we're hardworking behind the scenes to have him and a few other council members removed. LA has never been so bad. I am a brown woman that lives in a brown and black neighborhood. We actually do want more police officers in our neighborhoods. LAPD is one of the diverse police officers in the nation. They are good, honorable, hardworking people and not killers. They are not a white supremacy group. They are not racist. Anyone that does their homework knows that 50% are Hispanic, 30% are white, 9% are black. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Q followed by Jason R. Q, you're on. Okay, we'll come
Let's
back
go
to
the next caller.
Okay. Go to Jason R.
Hello,
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
All right, so this is Jason with BLM LA. Chief Moore is slithering around doing interviews full of more lies. He said that face coverings are a requirement and that all officers join in the protective measures of wearing a face covering. What a load of shit. He said that officers do their very best to provide for the safety of the public. What a fucking liar. Musty Mike won't enforce the LAPD mandated policy requiring officers to wear masks whenever in public or in the workplace. These super spreaders continue to infect our communities under his quote unquote leadership. He speaks about taking corrective action. It isn't working because that corrective action doesn't include any consequences. He speaks about providing education and information for officers who violate this policy. What more of that needs to happen? We are 19 months into a life-changing pandemic and LAPD's finest still don't understand why you need to wear a mask in public settings? The same ones that get paid 6 figures on average. Chief Moore should be fired for this alone, but we know he has a long list of failures. He must go. To this corny, cowardly commission, why aren't you asking Chief Moore why he refuses to take any disciplinary action against these officers? Where are the hard-hitting questions on why his officers can't do something as simple as wearing a mask? Why hasn't Moore detailed the process of his corrective action when officers don't wear masks? What happens after the first infraction, the second one, or the third one? When are they suspended without pay or subject to termination? They are putting people's lives at risk, and you act as if this isn't happening. LAPD posts pictures of themselves without masks while in the workplace on their own fucking Twitter page. This commission doesn't do shit. You're all too afraid to ask Musty Mike why he won't do a goddamn thing about his officers not wearing masks. If you don't care enough about COVID when it comes to the LAPD, then resume in-person meetings immediately. We don't want to hear you talk about the safety of folks in regards to COVID if you can't even do your part to get LAPD officers masked up. We all know it took Sergeant Gordon Helper standing for Tony Moon to finally get him in trouble with y'all, a self-proclaimed white supremacist himself. There's many more in your ranks, though. Captain Rick Stabile, Officer Rudy Gonzalez, to name a few. But this isn't surprising since the LAPD used Breitbart, a white supremacist media outlet, to recruit LAPD officers. And I'll close by saying that this commission is racist. How is it that my public comment last week was cut short, yet you allow these white supremacists free reign to spew anti-race, anti-Black rhetoric time and time again? And the reason why you won't label their commentary off topic or outside the purview of this commission is because this commission, like the LAPD, are the most visible specimens of white supremacy. How is it that this commission treats white supremacists the same way the LAPD treats them in the streets? Y'all treat them with love and compassion because that's your brethren. Briggs, you remind me of Eeyore. This guy looks like he's in the sunken place, sold his soul to the white devil. Only time I've ever seen him light up is talking about firing less lethals and when he's speaking about his people. And for the record, his people aren't Black people because we just owned him a while back. That would be the Proud Boys, KKK members, and the rest of the racist white delegation he coons for. Fuck you, little Stevie Soboroff. This wrinkly old man is a fucking...
Caller, please.
Okay, next we have Andrea, followed by Steve Rogers. Andrea, you're on. Okay, we'll go to the next caller. Steve Rogers.
Yes, I'd like to speak on 1, 2, and 4.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First, this is the United States of America, a constitutional republic, and all lives matter. It's very important that we remember that. And I want to say happy birthday to Steve Soboroff and Executive Director TFANC. Thank you for your service. We might not agree all the time, but I do know that you're trying to do the best that you can. And that goes for Chief also. I know that we may disagree, but I think we want what's best for the city, what's best for the department, public safety. Now, I'm going on the public comment. I'm going to make a couple of recommendations on readings, things that maybe the chief should read, the commissioners, and anybody listening. One is a book called Unmasked by Andy Ngo. That's very important because Antifa has been involved in Los Angeles. People claim it's not real, it's just an idea. Read the book, Unmasked. Unmask the people wearing the masks. Educate yourselves if you don't know already. Maybe some of you do. And another book about Antifa, The Antifa, by Jack Posobiec. That's Posobiec. It's very important for us to know who these people are because they're trying to stop others from having peaceful demonstrations. If they don't believe in vaccination mandates, that's their right to be there at City Hall and actually express themselves. An individual was stabbed. I'd like to know what the follow-up is on that, Chief. That's a significant incident. Has there been an arrest made? That is an incident that's very significant because it puts a chill on the right of all people to express themselves using the First Amendment. And so I think that it needs to be follow-up. There also needs to be a follow-up on, and I don't know what the status, if there was an arrest on the July 3rd incident where people were beaten, Christians were beaten, journalists were beaten. Oh yes, and there was a journalist also attacked at City Hall. So Antifa doesn't want their activities to be seen. Okay, read the books. I think it would be very beneficial. But to follow up on also Father St. Sarah's statue at Olvera Street by Union Station. Was there ever an arrest made on that? I mean, how does a mob basically pull down a statue without an arrest being made? There's a Chinese saying, the fish stinks from the top. And I think the top in this case is Mayor Ratzetti. I think maybe he's pulling the strings at times. And then let's go further to the state of California. The fish stinks at the top, and that's Gavin Newsom. He needs to be recalled. And I think that we need Larry Elder in there as governor to restore the rule of law from the top, and maybe that will filter down to the county and to the city. So all officers stay safe. God bless you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have T followed by Machos Kadane.
Hello,
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First off, I'd like to honor the fact we're on Turtle Island, indigenous stolen land. Also like to honor the over 640 lives that have been stolen by LAPD and LA Sheriff's Department over the past 7 years with zero accountability. Now, let's talk about Chief Moore's report. Excuse me, Michael Moore, because Chief is an insult to indigenous folks. Michael Moore continues to spread misinformation, lies, biased reports, and racist reports. He doesn't even acknowledge Ozzie Hutchins or Roman Reyes that were killed in the blast that was a deliberate explosion in South LA. Just last night on CBS, there was a report. All of those families have still not been able to return to their homes. One of the family members had spent their whole lives purchasing one of them homes that has not been able to return to their homes. They have not received compensation. They are still houseless, and no one has been held accountable. Chief Moore continues to spread lies and misinformation in his reports, and no one on this commission holds him or any of these other commissioners accountable. You talk about COVID. 3,000 of your officers have been infected when you have a whole department of 10,000. Y'all are 10,000 sworn in officers, and 3,000, what is that? 30% of y'all have contracted COVID and are out there spreading it because you refuse to wear a mask. Lastly, how do y'all keep letting these pro-blue, anti-black, white supremacist people come in and talk off topic week after week? And they have every week they're off topic, and you allow them to spew misinformation. It is absolutely and utterly disgusting. We have 640 families that have been impacted by police violence. You want to talk about gangs and the people and the guns and the violence on the streets, but you refuse, Chief Moore, to address the gangs in your department, the violence your law enforcement inflicts on Black and brown neighborhoods. No one has been held accountable for the 640 murders of our people. And you wonder how the guns and the drugs get in the country? Ask the CIA. This has been a government plan, a government project since the 1960s. Y'all know when you took the Panthers out, when you assassinated our folks, and you planted the drugs and the guns in the neighborhoods.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Machos Kadane, followed by Kim.
Hello,
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
all of them, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Thank you. This is Matios with BLM LA. First off, Steve Sobroff, you're not slick. We know that by gang on gang violence, you mean black on black. And instead of regurgitating Breitbart talking points, how about you focus on the police department killing Black and brown civilians, as that is supposed to be your purview. Although I suspect you aren't too concerned with Black and brown deaths. I hope you have an absolutely miserable birthday. On the chief's report, half your officers are still unvaccinated, and there's so many documented instances of LAPD officers interacting with vulnerable members of the public unmasked. You haven't held any police officers accountable for putting the public at risk. Instead, you still try to appeal to some sentiment of pity or guilt these police officers might have by making a stupid video. This further highlights that any notion of duty the LAPD might have to the public's well-being is a total lie. These morons won't even wear a mask to keep people safe. On the LAPD's June 30th bombing, it was not an accidental explosion, as you put it, Chief Moore. That detonation was deliberate. Your department's incompetence is an inevitability, and you still have not said the names of the two elderly individuals the LAPD murdered as a result of that bombing. Ozzie Hutchins and Ramon Reyes. Acknowledge the lives you've taken. On the LAPD report to the Public Safety Committee, I think this document does a great job of highlighting the pattern of LAPD breaking their own policy and effectively showing that they can't be reformed. The number of redundant changes in policy implemented in response to LAPD brutality is astonishing, but not nearly as impressive as the LAPD's unwavering commitment to being violent racists that brutalize protesters. If you read this report and still think this department can be reformed or fixed, you're delusional. We've done this over and over, increasing the LAPD budget every time, and in doing so, permitting the loss of Black and brown lives. This report references an LAPD bulletin regarding excited delirium. And this is indicated as being issued in 2016, but the Muckrock database shows that it was issued as recently as 2019 by Michael Moore. Moore describes excited delirium as being a medical emergency characterized by an acute onset of extreme agitation and bizarre or combative behavior. But really, this is just used to dehumanize Black folks, Black men in particular, and justify the police killing them. There's no basis in medical community, and it's not recognized by any major medical association. It's a barely sanitized racist pseudoscientific designation meant to further dehumanize Black people and justify police brutality and murder. We see this behavior by the LAPD most recently in the footage of officers tasing Jackson Hayes in the chest, putting his life at risk. It's language like this that perpetuates that type of brutality. Lastly, stop limiting public comment to 45 minutes. That's a ridiculous amount of time. It's absurd that you hear public comment, or we have to make public comment before you've discussed matters. Resume in-person meetings with a Zoom option. And yeah, also name the officers that were involved in the June 6th attack on the Capitol. I'd like to know if a Nazi pulls me over. I yield the rest of my time. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Kim, followed by Haram Cormier Jr.
Hello, can you hear me?
Hi, yes, what items would you like to speak on?
All of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
First off, I could not even believe Chief Moore said out of his mouth several times the accidental detonation or bombing or whatever the hell he said. Accidental several times. We all know it was on purpose. It was not an accident. And you guys sat there and nobody called him on it. Isn't that what y'all are supposed to do? Hold the police accountable? It's like, what is this commission's, why are you even there? Because you don't hold the police accountable for anything. There were press invited to this accidental detonation. Come on, man. Do you think we're stupid? Secondly, he also sat there and just lied about making these folks whole. They are still not made whole. They are still not in their homes. How long has it been? It's been what, months now? I mean, come on. I am just exhausted with these lies, and I'm exhausted with him not doing a job. And let me just tell you, yesterday, we stopped. We saw the police. I forget where we were on, Slauson or whatever road. I don't even remember. Crenshaw. I don't remember the road. And it was in front of a liquor store, and they had stopped 3 teenagers for I don't know what. There were 4 cars, you needed all of those cars for these kids. And they were all standing there. Guess what? Nobody had on masks. So I get out of my car. We pulled over and we stopped. I got out of my car. I go over and I was like, oh, no, nobody's wearing masks. Y'all don't have masks. Oh, then all of a sudden, a few people put on masks. 2 of them put on masks after I said something. Oh, they were very nice and polite. And I said, I want to know what's going on. What's going on with these kids? Why are you here? I want to know what's going on. Why are they being detained? And apparently they pulled these kids out of the car. They had barely even stopped. How are you? And then they searched their car. No warrant. They constantly profiling Black and brown people. And that's what we mean by racism. That's what we're talking about. You profile our people before you even know if they have done anything, before you even know if they've committed a crime. You just look at a brown face and all of a sudden they're pulled over. And that's what we're talking about. So anybody that thinks that they are not racist, they have no clue, and they are walking around in their white privilege, not being aware of the experience of Black and brown people, because we see it. I saw it yesterday. I see it constantly. I saw it several weeks ago where their 2 Black kids, young kids, had been pulled over sitting there. I'm telling you, this happens constantly, and the police are responsible. Chief Moore, you need to be fired.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Haram Cormier Jr., followed by Javier Hermosillo.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
All items.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Yeah. I don't know, man. There's just so much racist stuff that is said on this commission by the commissioners, the off-duty cops who call in here, and just the average Smurf who calls in. Damn, man, where do I start? First of all, Moore, you referred to the bombing that y'all did on 27th as an accident. Like other callers said, that wasn't no accident. And as I said a few weeks ago, if this was Palos Verdes or the Palisades or Malibu or whatever, that shit would have never happened. So miss me with the accident shit and acknowledge the 2 people who you killed and make that community whole and get out the neighborhood again. Get the fuck on, for real. On top of that, this whole scam of police reform, we go over and over and over and over again. There's a long ass history of the LAPD and cops all over this country, all over this world, who do horrible shit, racist shit, profiling people, killing people, abusing people, stalking, harassing, raping, stop and frisk, whatever you want to name, mass incarceration, whatever you want to name, they do this shit. And then we talk about reform, 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 reform. You can reform these nuts. You're not reforming nothing. We not reforming nothing. We need to defund the police. How much longer does this have to go on? Stop this damn charade. It's costing people their lives. Y'all keep talking about crime and gang violence and all this old bullshit. You want to know where the guns are coming from? You. That's where guns come from. Cops or white people from out of state or some shit. Even Bonner acknowledged that shit, or whoever, whichever one of you motherfuckers said that. Y'all are some fucking clowns. Stop this fucking charade. End the war on drugs. Create jobs for Black people, and poverty, and homelessness, mass incarceration, corporate exploitation, discrimination, investing in schools. Have you looked at Washington High School? Have you looked at Fremont? I live right down the corner from fucking Washington, nigga. Look at the gates that surround this school. Look at what y'all are doing to these kids. These look like juvenile centers. These look like prisons. This is institutionalization that needs to fucking stop. California has 13 federal prisons, 13 federal camps, 8 federal prison camps, 35 adult prisons, 4 YAs. Over 115 county jails, in LA has the 2 most murderous and ruthless police bodies in the entire world. It's a trap. I don't want to hear shit about none of that. No, ain't no fucking gang violence. Only gang violence there is Team 29 back in the day. You know, the gang unit that preceded Crash to use to target suspected gang members and literally kill them for rank. The SWAT mafia, all this other type of shit, all the gangs in your department. Nigga, stop that. You're not hard. You just got anger issues. You guys need to get the fuck on.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Javier Hermosillo, followed by LAPD Constitutional Freedom.
Can you hear me okay?
Hi, yes. What items would you like to speak on?
Yeah, I want to speak on a couple of the items here, specifically some of the stuff that has come up in this discussion. You know, Los Angeles is the safest big city in America, due in great measure, about 90%, to the fact that we have the LAPD and the LA sheriffs. And so this constant haranguing about you know, the chief isn't doing this, chief isn't doing that. The toughest job in this nation right now is being a chief of police. And, you know, when you have the Los Angeles Times and their liberal studies constantly attacking the police, a very small percentage of the population is complaining. I want to commend the chief. Last meeting wasn't able to get through on the increasing number of Latinos and women in the department. I hope that they're able to maintain the population of African Americans. I also want to talk about CPABs. Last week, you had a great presentation out of Van Nuys, but I have a concern about equity on the CPABs. Because, for example, the numbers that were given out suggested that out of the total people on CPAB, 28% are, 70% are Caucasian, while the population in the division is 28. 15% are Latinos, I'm sorry, are African Americans, while the African American population citywide is 9, and 50% are Hispanic, while the population of that division is 50. And the other thing was there was a reference made by the lady that spoke with the captain that there isn't as much Latino participation because the people are working during the day and can't come to the meetings. I'm one of the original founders of the CPABs down here in the Harbor area 40 some years ago. And, you know, we had some of the meetings in the day, sometimes mostly at night, so that we could have community participation in attendance. And I think that's something that the department needs to look at citywide in order to ensure that, you know, everybody is able to come out. You shouldn't punish people who work. Now, there are a lot of people in CPABs who are retired, they're elderly, et cetera. And, you know, they have much more control over their schedule than a younger people, even if they're in their 50s, that's still young. The other thing I wanted to address very quickly was to thank the commission in their zeal to inquire about what's going on. And I know it's a tough job, but the last thing I want to talk about is the attack on Latino merchants that continue, and also the attacks on Asians. And perhaps you know, we can get somebody to speak expertly to that here in the near future. Thank you very much for your time.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have LAPD constitutional, followed by caller ending 4952.
Hi, this is Maria speaking.
Hi, what items would you like to speak on?
All, please.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, so I just want to make it very clear that a corrupt mandate may get legalized, but it is still unlawful. Peacemakers have an oath to constitutional policing. So ungodly, unconstitutional orders, mandates, laws will not be followed. So it is really sad to hear that the union is supporting an effort to coerce officers into a Chi-Com forced vaccination agenda without informed consent. So this is causing a hostile work environment with discrimination against unvaccinated officers. The religious exempt officers will not be forced tested, okay? The forced testing is fraudulent. The biochemist inventor of the PCR test himself, Kary Mullis, said this was never meant to be diagnostic. So all this leftist contact tracing Clinton Global Initiative is actually stealing unvaccinated officer biological data, and that cannot be allowed. So this one-sided education that you're forcing down the throat of officers who don't want it, you actually need to do the right thing and give the other side of videos, testimonies, experts on vaccine injury, okay? And also educating officers that their little satanic occult mask that you guys are forcing them to wear actually self-inflicts bacteria pneumonia, okay? And you also need to educate officers, and especially the poor vaccinated officers, that they are actually shedding and sloughing their prion implanted viral load, okay? That is causing the sickness that is going on. So it's really sad that we live in an unfortunate time where medical providers are killing people with the quote unquote COVID protocols, such as blowing out their lungs with ventilators instead of providing non-toxic therapies and life-saving medicine like ivermectin. Okay, so you need to make it clear what the submission process is for officers if you're telling them their exemptions are due by 9/7, because officers still do not have the correct submission process of how their private information is going to be received and not targeted for retaliation. So unvaccinated officers are no doubt healthier than the vaccinated officers. And there is plenty people in the public of Los Angeles that want to be protected and served by the diverse police force that includes unvaccinated officers. So I want to tell all the little BLM leftists that guess what? You need to stop doing the work of your oppressor. And if you're Black.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have caller 4952, followed by Eugene Pesikov. Caller 4952, you're on.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Hi, yes. What items would
Hello?
you like to speak on? What items would
Okay,
you
I'm
like
going
to
to speak on all of them.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Okay, this is Tigara. I'm with the Stop LAPD Spying Coalition and LAPC Fails. I'm going to speak on the report to the Public Safety Committee, and as already described so well by a number of folks who've commented, besides giving us this history of selected lawsuits that have already been filed against LAPD in the past, dating back a few decades, and some of the policy changes that came from those, many of which we've already seen broken from LAPD. So besides laying out that history and giving us that documentation of how LAPD culture and brutality and the breaking of policy does not change over time, I was concerned when reading it that one of the training bulletins listed was regarding LAPD being trained in excited or agitated delirium. And just so we are clear, commissioners, excited or agitated delirium is pretty widely understood to be a made-up condition that is used to describe the so-called sudden death of a person, more often than not a Black man or a Black person who supposedly dies in police custody, mysteriously and suddenly dies while being restrained by police and while having their air supply restricted. We all know this was something that was referenced by the cops who murdered George Floyd, and looking at LAPD in just a brief search, we can see that agitated or excited delirium, this thing that cops are being trained in, that LAPD cops are being trained in, has been cited in at least 4 reports for Lee Hughes, Michael Mears, and Jettison Swaggerty, all of whom were supposedly killed in police custody, murdered by police, and also for Grishario Mack, who was a person who was having a mental health crisis, as were some of these other folks, and who had just been released from being incarcerated very recently. But because of how LAPD is trained to view the community as threats, and specifically the Black community, and specifically folks who are disabled or in crisis, LAPD murdered these folks because they could only view them as threats, and because they are encouraged to view them as threats, how that's part of the culture, and not to see them as people who may be in crisis or need aid. And we also see, by your shitty question today, Sobroff, how LAPD is further trained and encouraged to see Black people as gang members, and how this commission is complicit in that. And I reject this report. Conversations about LAPD training are a waste of time for an organization that is fundamentally racist, corrupt, and violent. I also have to name this is not the first or last time LAPD has used bullshit scientific theories to justify its attack on local communities. Just in the last 10 years, we've seen LAPD collaborate with UCLA in a study headed by Jeff Brantingham and Andrea Bertozzi, people who think that the CSP program is doing just great and recommend it. And they've theorized in this study how the spatial gang dynamics in the Hollenbeck Policing Division of Eastern LA was similar to the behavior of wolves and coyotes. We've also seen LAPD promote PredPol, which said that crimes move like an earthquake. So as ridiculous as these things sound, these pseudo-scientific theories that LAPD is investing in and promoting, what we are describing here, including with so-called
Madam Secretary, this next caller will be the last. Thank you.
Okay, Eugene Pesikov.
Yes, good morning. I also, I'm concerned about gang violence like Steve Sobroff is. That's why I'm a proponent of abolishing and defunding the police department. I wanted to quickly note that Steve Sobroff has no business being on this board of commission. I think it's a joke that he's still allowed to be on the board of commission. I think anyone who has any concern for objectivity, knowing Steve Sobroff's past and also his present, right? Like on his Tesla, he has a police badge on his vehicle, which means that he's not an impartial commissioner, right? He's essentially made it open, right? Or openly been pro-police. He's tried to run for seats that represent the police department and represent their union. He is not somebody that is on the side of the people on this issue, it would be like somebody that was openly a Clippers fan, right? And wearing Clippers gear, officiating a Clippers basketball game, right? That shit would never pass on that level, and show it should not pass on this board of commissioners, right? I think if anyone here is interested in at least trying to present an objective civilian oversight committee, and rather than, as Hamed said, just have a shock absorber that pretends to care about the people's complaints and the people's concerns, but do nothing about it. I think if people did actually care, they would remove Steve Soboroff from the Board of Commissioners, because again, he has shown time and time again that he is not up for the job. He has no real interest in being impartial and actually holding the police accountable. So my one, I guess, thing that I'd like to see happen is for Steve Soboroff to be removed from the Board of Commissioners. As far as Steve said, black on black crime goes and violence is concerned, I think that people would be, they'd find some value in looking up the People's Budget LA. Also, there's some great books and material on end of policing by Alex Vital. More policing, more money for policing does not address crime. There are programs and there are studies that have already shown that putting that money that goes into policing into other social services and other programs actually reduce crime. There are a bunch of European countries that have a fraction of the money, that spend a fraction of the money that this city does in policing, and have lower crime rates and less, as Steve Soboroff and others on this board have said, gang.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. That now ends the public comment period. We'll now go to item 3 on the agenda, the consent agenda items. We have one matter on the consent agenda items. Do any commissioners have any questions about that single item? Seeing none, I move that we approve item 3A, the department's report relative to the travel authority to the chief of police to attend the Major City Chiefs Association Police Executive Leadership Institute. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Motion carries unanimously 4-0. The next item that we have on the agenda, item 4A, the regular agenda item, is the department's presentation on the dispatch protocols service. Can we please bring up Commander Brockway, Commander Pesos, Captain Vargas, and Captain Dixon? Commander Brockway, please proceed.
Good morning. Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Mr. Teepank. Good morning, Mr. Sibley. Good morning, Mr. Delgado. And of course, good morning, Chief Moore. Before we get started, I would like to introduce the team that's with me today that worked on the alternate dispatch over the last couple of years. To my right, from Communications, Alex Vargas, Captain Alex Vargas. Again, to my right, closest to you, from DSVD, Captain Brian Dixler. And to my left, to your right, Captain Al Pasos from Traffic Group. And finally, from Communications, Lieutenant Tony Lebetic. So I'm going to go ahead and get started with our oral presentation for the alternates to dispatch. On June 16, 2020, in response to the George Floyd protests that began 2 weeks earlier, 6 city council members introduced a motion directing city departments to explore ways of implementing alternatives to police response for nonviolent and/or non-criminal calls for service. The chief of police directed our office to begin the Alternatives to Dispatch project with the goal of analyzing all calls the department is responding to, but would fall within the purview of another city entity or non-government organization. For the next few months, our department worked with Communications Division, Application Development Support Division, Traffic Group, and the Detective Support and Vice Division. We identified 5 major types of calls for service that could be directed away from patrol. These were homeless-related calls, calls for other services that are the responsibility of other city family partners, mental health-related calls, calls that go directly to our department community online reporting system, and traffic-related calls. In the beginning of 2021, identified calls started to be diverted from patrol, some on a 24/7 days a week basis. With that, communications division currently diverts calls to 311 for services involving homeless encampments, blocking the public right of way, and other services. For calls requesting city or county services for food, shelter, and COVID-19 relief, communications division diverts the calls to the 211 LA call center, which then connects the caller with the Los Angeles Homeless Service Authority, or LAHSA, or one of the participating agencies to conduct outreach services. With that, Captain Vargas can discuss these diversions in greater detail. Sir?
Good morning, Commissioners. Good morning, Chief. So I want to explain the process for Communications Division because we had a vital role in this diversion. So when we met with the entities that Commander Brockway spoke of, both internally with the LAPD and externally with city and county entities, we would collaborate, come up with a solution for how to divert these calls, and then we created what was called a divisional order for Communications Division. 8 of them were created within a 4-month period from November to March of this year. So I do want to commend my dispatchers. We, the Communications Division, we were used to a process of diverting calls that we adhere to strictly. This is something new for not only for our dispatchers, but for the city. But I want to commend my dispatchers for the great work they did and the results that we've had. So once those dispatch divisional orders were created, we, prior to launching, about within a week or 2-week period, we would email those divisional orders to all our dispatchers. We also would talk about it in the roll call. For some of the dispatch protocols that were a little more complicated, we would create videos that we would play in a roll call for them. We didn't stop there. Once the process was going, we continually monitor it. And if we saw any diversion or any decrease in the amount of diversion calls for a particular area, then we would go and talk about it in roll call again. We also monitor our dispatchers on a regular basis, and we saw that they were creating a radio call for a call that could have been diverted. Then we would meet with them, provide them follow-up with the training, and ensure that that for next time it was diverted. And I do want to say that they were responsive. We were worried that the community would not take to the fact that when they call for police services, and they were not going to have a police officer respond, and it would cause some kind of friction or for them to be upset. But we were able to explain the process to our dispatchers. I'm happy to say that we do monitor the personnel complaints that we get based on citizens, and we only have 2 complaints so far this year. So it means that our dispatchers are being patient, explaining why it's important for the city to dispatch and to divert some certain calls that are not emergencies to ensure that our officers will figure out how to respond to the emergency calls. So I'm happy to say that both of those complaints, we've only had 2. So I'll start with the 211. The 211 is city and county services. The 211 service operates on a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week process. And like Commander Brockway discussed earlier, it has to do with services for food, shelter, COVID-19, and homeless issues. And we primarily deal with LAHSA in this case. We have diverted 1,341 calls to the 211 system since its inception in November 13, 2020, and a total so far this year, 2021, to 748 calls. We also deal with 311, and 311 is a city services. That does not operate on a 24-hour basis. They operate Monday through Friday from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and on Saturday and Sunday from 8 a.m. to 16:45 hours. And then on off hours, we continue to divert by dispatching them to their 311 communication center. We actually divert them over to the website where they're able to complete the request through their website information. Those calls that are diverted to 311 have to do with graffiti removal, homeless encampments, pothole repairs, bulky item pickup, tree trimming, non-emergency animal-related services, leaf blower violations, dockless mobility enforcement, which I just found out is people who ride the scooters or bicycles that we have throughout the downtown LA in an unsafe manner on the sidewalk. Dead animal pickup and other non-emergency services. We have diverted on a regular basis, on a weekly basis, we diverted between 13 to 19 calls to 311. So far since November 13, 2020, we've diverted 748 calls. And so far this year, 61 calls. Now, for the courts, for the community online reporting, which we also utilize for the diversion program, there's two components of it. One that has to do with traffic, which Commander Pasos can talk about that after me, and I'll cover right now the crimes that we deal with in the courts program. And there's two for vandalism. Both felony and misdemeanor, there's harassing phone and annoying phone calls. There's theft, both grand theft and petty theft. There's burglary and theft of motor vehicles, lost property, and identity theft. Those are the areas that we covered in the courts program. Now, course of deployment is through the DOC, and I want to commend Commander Lieutenant Rivera for the outstanding job he's done. We have 2 supervisors and 8 officers strictly dedicated to the course program within the DOC. They work between the hours of 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 7 days a week. We chose those hours because our analysis showed that those are the most active when people complete the reports. And it makes it more feasible for us to be able to do the callbacks to people. We don't have to call anybody beyond 8 p.m. For the report. We are mandated to complete the reports and forward to detectives in the 24-hour period. And I'm happy to say that the last audit in February of this year shows that the DOC was able to meet that standard with 100%. We do it for 2 reasons. We want to make sure we provide proper service to the community, and also we want to make sure we have accurate crime reporting for the city and the divisions so they can be aware of the crimes that they are seeing through the completion of the court reports. So far this year, we've completed 54,157 reports on the court program that the officers have processed. 16,208 are traffic, and then 37,877 have to do with crime reports. We've seen a big increase. We've seen a 56% increase from 2020, where at this time last year, we had 24,384 reports completed. And we're on pace to surpass last year's total number, which was 55,000. So in about 1,000 more reports, will reach all of last year's number. And it's a growing process and it's ever a changing process. Our kickback rate for those reports we keep track of is 22%. So we're finding ways to reduce that. At the beginning of the year, it was up to at 40%. So we worked with OO and Information Technology Division to find ways of making the process more user-friendly. One of the things we found out early on is the fact that the reporting and the titles of some of the reports were very police jargon, and they were more created by cops or cops. So we wanted to make it more user-friendly to the community. So we found out that the issues that we found out were the location of occurrence, the point of entry, location of incident, and location of amount, which just words that were being used by officers, not really for the community. So we have those changed and we've seen some good results. And like I said, now we've seen a big reduction on the amount of kickbacks or rejects that we have. Another issue why our numbers are so low in the kickbacks is because we do a lot of callbacks. Because of those hours, we're able to call back citizens. Our goal is not to kick back any report. So we make every effort to call the citizens back as often as we can. And sometimes there are multiple callbacks to people for them to call us back so we can make sure that the report is accurate, complete, and is processed on a timely basis. We started off at the beginning of the year with about a 70% rate of calling people back. Because of the changes we made to the reports and the education of the public, we've reduced that to less than 50%. But we're still trying to find ways to lower that number even continuously more. One of the thoughts are to do help desk. And we're discussing that to see how we can utilize that. On average, on a weekly basis, we process between 150 to 200 reports a week. And so far this year, we've processed or diverted 6,000 calls, radio calls that were generated to court reports. Like I said, most of our reports are done not only to the diversion, but officers that are in the field that are giving information to the community members so they can make the reports without having to spend more time there and move on to the next radio call or be available for the next emergency call. So that is for the court report for time. I'll pass it over to Commander Paulson to deal with the traffic part of the course program.
Yes, real quick before we get, so in September of 2020, we began working with Traffic Group and see if we could reduce the number of traffic reports officers took to the field. In 2019, we were about 56,000. Traffic Group recommended that approximately 46,000 of these reports could be taken online through Coors. Additionally, as Alex just talked about, Captain Vargas, Communications Division transferred thousands of calls for service to Coors with the topics or the titles of vandalism, theft, lost property, as you mentioned. So with that, Commander Passos can discuss, or Captain Passos right now, can discuss progress to date on these efforts.
Good morning. And so as Commander Brockway just stated, in 19, originally Coors was, traffic group was involved doing misdemeanors with misdemeanor hit and runs with no follow-up. In 2021 is when this became fully expanded, went online, and all misdemeanor hit and runs were then able to collectively go to Coors and without follow-up, of course, and then a traffic collision resulting in minor or complaint of injury. With the expansion, that caused us to change what's called our 437 form, where it's an exchange of information, which on there provides community information on how to log on, how to get online, and how to complete a Coors traffic investigation. With that process, the electronic age, it will then go to a review, is very much like it does with the OO reports. Traffic groups personnel will review those that are just the collisions with complaint of or minor injury, and the hit and runs all go to the commands for their review. If there is follow-up information that's obtained, those are easily upgraded and become a full course investigation for that detective command out into the traffic. So what we know is in comparison is that through this today, to date, in comparison to 2021, there was 12,790 incidents that were done by officers in the field. And then the year before, if you look at the comparing, there was 28,000. Since the launch of Coors, between the 2021 of officers responding with the 12,790, Coors has accepted 13,895 incidents via the Coors system. What we know is this has caused traffic commands to respond to 54% less collisions, which is roughly in a ballpark saving officer hours of about 30,588 personnel hours. And so hit and runs, we see very much the same thing, where in 2020, we had 10,893 that were in-field responses. In 2021, 3,230. And of that other overflow with Coors, it was 9,639 taken by the Coors system. And then if you look at the minor injuries in 2020, there was 11,152 incidents that responded to. And then in 2021, it went down to 2,566. And with the Coors system, there was a supplement of 4,256 reports taken. So overall, the Coors system is being effective. Most of the feedback that we're getting from the community is these are more of exchange informations where they need complete or other additional forwarding information to report to their insurance company to meet those claims and the expectation for the parties involved.
All right, thanks, sir. All right, the Detective Support and Advice Division, which runs the Mental Evaluation Unit, designed a decision tree for Communications Division to refer possible specific attempt suicide calls to the D.D. Hirsch crisis line. MEU has changed their dispatch protocols to a dual response model to patrol allowing DMH, Department of Health, clinicians a quicker response to these critical incidents. Captain Bixler can speak more on these developments.
Absolutely. Thank you, Commander. Good morning. And I know I've spoken to many about this program before. Just as a recap, though, The suicide diversion program came online on February 1st of this year on an 8-hour pilot basis. So it was going from noon to 8 p.m., wherein communications dispatchers would transfer certain types of suicide calls to the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, which is here, and is also acts as the national suicide hotline for the West Coast, and actually takes most of the national suicide hotline calls. So very well-known program. So February 1st, when we first started, it was very successful, and we saw a fluctuating number of calls each month, which is actually consistent with the number of mental health calls we get. It's not a consistent number. It's very fluid. And because of the success of the program, the City Council, along with your support, made this program no longer a pilot, but 24/7. So starting July 1st, it was 24/7, and the number significantly increased. For example, in June, when it was just 8 hours, it was 111 calls, and then in July, that number went to 273 calls for the month of July. So year to date, we diverted 839 calls to the D.D. Hirsch Suicide Prevention Center, and of those, only 31 have required police response. So a real significant diversion away from having a black and white show up to these calls. We look forward to the same type of success moving forward. D.D. Hirsch is now being asked by agencies around the world to kind of talk about how they develop this partnership with us and to make that as a model for other agencies to follow. So we're excited about that. When it comes to our co-deployed or co-response, the main difference is prior to this new program, we would have a police unit show up, a regular patrol unit show up to a call. They would then call the MEU triage desk, and we would determine if it needed a SMART team response or not. That led to some delays, but also because of limited resources, allowed us to triage which calls we would be most effective at responding to. With the new protocol, Communications Division will voice over the air and over MEU's frequency as well. Simply it says with SMART. So it'll be 6A45 with SMART, respond to the 415 man with mental illness. So that will alert the MEU unit to start moving that way, and they can get there much more timely. And year to date, we've actually seen an increase in 19% of SMART being able to handle calls versus last year. Now, numbers are somewhat skewed because of COVID last year, but we are seeing an increase. And anecdotally, the ability to have SMART teams on scene quicker, to diffuse, de-escalate, and also to even triage and say this is actually not a mental health call, and move the case in the right direction. So again, those are pretty quickly just some of the numbers, and I get monthly reports from D.D. Hirsch on how many calls they are diverting. We're diverting to them. We have weekly, monthly meetings with Communications Division, with myself, and with personnel from D.D. Hirsch to talk about any issues we're having, and to try and streamline the process even more. And that's all I have for today.
Thanks, sir. That's not going to conclude our presentation, but what I really want to be able to stress to everyone is that we meet constantly to discuss what's working, what's not working, to adjust the best we possibly can, and to really hear and listen what it is that we may be doing right and what we can improve on, and what we can expand on. So with that, that'll conclude our presentation and open up for any type of questions that we have. Our team is ready.
Thank you, Commander. And I do have a couple of questions to start off. These are primarily for Captain Bixler with respect to the MEUs. So I've had occasion to go on a couple of ride-alongs and respond to various calls throughout the city. And I say that more than 50% of those calls that we responded to involved some sort of mental health issue. And so I'm particularly interested in the number of SMART units that we have let's just say per bureau, to start out with. And because I want to know whether or not we need more resources there. Given anecdotally what I've seen are, a lot of calls that involve mental health in some fashion or another. So, Captain Bixler, can you just walk me through that, if you would?
Absolutely, Commissioner. So we deploy much like a patrol division. We have 4 watches. One starts at 06. The next one is at 10 in the morning, and then 3:30 in the afternoon, and then 8 o'clock at night. So we have 24-hour coverage. Now, right now, we're averaging about 12 units per day over that 24-hour period. We would like to put out 2 units on our first watch at 6 in the morning. That's our lowest call load. And after that, our main watch at 10 o'clock, we would actually try to get 2 units per bureau. So we'd put out 2 in West Bureau, 2 in South, 2 in Valley, and 2 in Central. And then we would bolster that in the afternoon. And then obviously overnight is when we're at our leanest, I would say, for deployment, because the calls drop off significantly. So I would like to say there's always 2 units per bureau, but that may not be the case. And as you said, a lot of those calls, they get taken up very quickly. And if they have to transport somebody, they're out of service for a while. So that's where we're at. And I know that Chief Moore has voiced that he would like to increase our ability. But again, we are held to those numbers by the Department of Mental Health, because a SMART team is not just a police officer. It is a Department of Mental Health clinician that rides with them. So again, it's not just us saying, oh, we're going to put more personnel there. It's a collaborative that we need the county's support with. And that's the last time when we expanded in 2016. That was a county board of supervisors motion that allowed them to hire the clinicians to then double the size of our unit at that time.
So Captain, I'm going to put you on the spot. I gave some anecdotal information about, just my experience with bridal loans. What are you saying in terms of the numbers? The number of calls that involve mental health in some fashion or another, where it would be more appropriate for us to have a SMART unit respond to, but we simply don't have the resources.
So I'll take year-to-date numbers. We have 12,915 calls we identified as calls involving a mental health crisis. Not just, somebody talking to themselves, but these are crisis situations where somebody has to call 911. SMART was able to handle 4,655 of those calls. So you can see that's less than 50%. And again, some of those calls we may not be able to get to in time, or that person is also included in that number as somebody who has committed a crime and they're actually going to be booked. So that, again, may not be appropriate for a SMART team to go to, because actually that's going to be a criminal booking. So, you say how many, and Chief Moore and I have talked about this, there's never going to be that number that we're going to get to that's the right number of SMART teams. The chief's goal is that anytime a patrol unit requests SMART, there should be one available. And so that's, I know, coming from Chief Moore to those numbers, there's a significant gap between what we have and what would be needed with that number of 12,915 calls.
Commissioner, simply stated, we could double the size of SMART and we still wouldn't be enough. This co-responder model is the best in the country as regards to its current deployment numbers, but it's woefully inadequate. And this really goes to the alternative service model in policing and the challenges in 21st century policing. Law enforcement across the country wants to have medical professionals with us, clinicians, joined by properly trained officers to, in this co-responder model, be present and as first responders. And I'm proud of the work of Dr. Sharon and Department of Mental Health and his support, as well as the Board of Supervisors. And there is currently a proposal before the Board of Supervisors for an additional staffing for SMART with additional clinicians. Commander Brockway, if you're prepared to speak to that, or Detective Bureau.
Yeah. So I know that Chief Pitcher was following up with the Board of Supervisors, and I don't know the status of that motion. I do know that there are other county boards, not the boards, county issues that are looking at to hire more broadly based, like psychiatric mobile response team, which is 2 clinicians. There is a large group working on how to increase, not just for the LAPD, but as Chief Moore said, the alternate responses, so that, and again, this is what more on communications division was to say, okay, when can we dispatch to psychiatric mobile response teams? When can we dispatch to these other things that are starting? So I know that we're probably a year away from any of that happening because it's just a slow process. But one thing that we do know is that in July 1st of next year, the 988 National Crisis Line goes online, which is going to be put down by the federal government. It's going to be across the country, and it's going to be a crisis line. So I'm on several subcommittees to try and figure out when that call comes in 988, it's going to be Dee Hirsch that's probably and the county that are going to be now triaging those calls. And so that's going to open up more options for us as to train and to talk to our community members about the difference between 911 and 988. And so as we get closer on to that coming up, we'll have a better idea of what that looks like. And by that, again, that is a whole county approach, not just for the city of Los Angeles.
Captain Bixler, Commander Brockway, thank you very much. I'm going to open it up to other commissioners if you have questions. Commissioner Bonner, your mic is not on. We can't hear you, Commissioner Bonner.
Yeah, I said I saw Commissioner Kalanche. She beat me to the punch, so I was deferring to her. So let her go ahead first. Thank you.
Commissioner Kalanche.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that. I just have a request and then a quick question. I was trying to keep track of all the data and I was kind of having a hard time hearing everything that was because I guess just the space of the room. And so I'm wondering, Commander, if it's possible to get some of the presentation and the data sent to us electronically, just so that I can have the most accurate numbers. I was trying to jot everything down, but it was a little bit difficult. So that would be my request. I hope that's okay. The other question I have in regards to the mental health response, I'm wondering how much or how many, I guess I should say, of the calls are connected to either substance abuse or someone under the influence. Yeah.
So different calls. So the calls going to Dee Hirsch, we wouldn't have that clinical information because once we give that call to them, it's theirs. Now the greater majority of them, just anecdotally, I would say probably 75% are co-occurring disorders, which means mental health with a substance abuse issue combined. Now, when we take somebody with a SMART team, sometimes we'll try to have that discussion and figure it out, but a lot of times we'll just leave that to the clinic or to the hospital where we bring them, and they can, do what they need to do medically to determine if that's the case. But you are right. I would say a good 70 to 75% of them are co-occurring disorders.
Okay. I ask because I know that there's a lot more emphasis on funding for substance use disorder. So I'm wondering if that's something that we should look into in the county or in the state, opportunities to apply for funding that's connected to substance use disorder. I know there's like a big move in that direction. So I just want to make sure that the department is on top of it and looking for any opportunity to maybe fund some of these units with some of the substance use disorder funding. Just a thought, it's something to look into.
Yeah.
And that would be it. Just, Commander, if I could just get some of the data that was presented in electronically or in writing, that would be super helpful.
Roger that, Commissioner. We'll take care of that.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kalanche. Commissioner Bonner.
All right, thank you very much. I'll address the comment primarily to Commander Brockway, and then trust you to delegate or defer as appropriate. And I'm just really first just going big picture, going up about 50,000 feet, and would ask these questions in this context. Invite you to reframe if you want. But from my standpoint, when I think about a lot of the discussion around alternative dispatch and the like, there's two very broad reasons why we may be interested in trying to build this out. One is a workload issue, getting right sizing, if you will, the role and mission of the department and freeing officers up to do other types of police work. And then at the same time, there's also the interest, and at least speaking for myself, the personal interest in just an overall trying to achieve an overall reduction in the number of interactions with police and the public, in the interest of also then reducing incidents of use of force incidents, particularly those situations that start with one thing, whether it's a mental health situation, a traffic stop, whatever it is, situation that starts one thing and then ends up with involving a use of force. So those are kind of my two broad ways that I'm looking at this. And so when I'm speaking to the second situation, again, just broadly speaking, when you talked about the 5 categories, is there any, or I should say, for whichever reason, whether you're interested in the workload issue or the use of force issue, when you look across those 5 categories, is there any yet way to broadly project the estimated number of interactions that could be reduced if each of these 5 areas were, fully operational and successful, for whatever that might mean? But again, broadly speaking, any general sense of the level of or the number of interactions that could be reduced 5%, 10%, something more than that?
Yeah, well, let's talk for a second about it, and then Captain Pasos has a little bit of a breakdown as far as the number of calls for service, the man hours that were rejected.
Commissioner Bonner, one way we can measure it is the amount of radio calls that are being generated. So if you look at the amount of radio calls that are generated at emergency, primary 911, we've seen an increase so far this year of 3%. But if you look at that same number for the non-emergency numbers, which is the alternative dispatch protocols mostly deal with those non-emergency numbers, we've seen a 54% decrease in those calls for service, from 400,000 to from 885,000 to 408,000 this year. So it's a big drop. So, and those are numbers that most of the alternative dispatch calls are being addressed with the very non-emergency numbers. So overall, we've seen a decrease of radio calls by 19%, from 2,874,000 to 2,897,000 to 2,351,000. So we've seen the decrease in the amount of contact that our officers are responding out to the scene, and primarily in non-emergency calls.
That's based on just the existing report, and based on even with the existing limitations and so on. If I may be mishearing you, but if you were suggesting there was you're seeing a 19% reduction in radio calls, was I understand that correctly?
Correct. As so far as of right now, with the results that the current dispatch protocol has provided us for us now. Sure, if it was more increased, there were more areas that we covered, that number may be more significant.
Okay, appreciate that. And I'll be interested in maybe if we can just share the information that you're going to provide to Commissioner Calanche, which is just the recitation of what you reported here, so we can maybe follow the details a little more closely. But if I might just here focus on the 5th of the categories that you reported on. This is the traffic stops and or traffic enforcement, I suppose. And the question is that I know I've seen some recent commentary about the level of preparation and readiness at the city's Department of Transportation, and how ready they are to take over some of this work. But my question here really is, let's assume that they were, fully funded and ready to go, and that were operational. Is there some residual role that the department would be maintaining relative to traffic stops? So, the conversation has been around traffic enforcement. So somebody's going, 25 in a 15-mile-an-hour zone, somebody's double parked, those kind of things. If you could just contrast or break down for us more specifically what this really means to divert, traffic calls. Because I presume if somebody's weaving in and out of traffic, presenting a threat to the public, or drunk driving, those things, my assumption is that there are some things that the department will continue to be involved in. And then more importantly, what I'm asking is whether diverting these calls would also necessarily result in a reduction in traffic stops, just in the community generally.
And Commissioner, to look at the information on traffic stops that you're asking, the CORS data that we have available and the system that is set up for alternative dispatch, doesn't define traffic stops. It just defines traffic collisions. So we're talking two very different things. One is a reportable incident, and the other would be an observations made by the officers in the field. So there's nothing collectively that alternative dispatch would cross correlate with the traffic stops that you're asking about or traffic enforcement. This is strictly folks involved in a collision that meet the criteria of a hit and run with no follow-up and or a collision with complaint of or minor injury.
Okay, so if I'm understanding correctly, what you're clarifying is that this discussion today and the information you've reported relates specifically to the traffic collision, the set of stops or a set of activity around traffic collisions.
Right, and what it relates to is in the identified areas is reports that are being made. So in essence, yes, contacts are being minimized. As for instance, for traffic, we know we responded to 54% less of those in-person contacts. We know that from the data that were given from the CORS reports taken. But to the questions you're asking, and then for the information that Captain Vargas presented, as well as Commander Brockway, those are also contacts, but they're not necessarily contacts in the aspect of what you're equating it to as traffic stop or traffic enforcement.
Okay,
Contacts with the community for us to respond for service.
Appreciate that. And I just the observation would be that it'll be important, certainly for me, it's important to understand that and probably for this and future discussions to understand it, because the risk is that some of this, at least when we hear just the broad conversation around diverting or alternative dispatch for traffic, some, like as I just did, make the false assumption that what we're talking about is reducing the number of times that an LAPD unit has to pull somebody over to do something for whatever that reason that is. When, if I'm understanding right now, the conversation really is about the workload issue of not having LAPD officers or reducing their role in responding and addressing traffic collision activity. So if I'm right, you're just pointing out that two different things, and I think those conversations are sometimes conflated. So it's just at least important for me to keep that in mind. And I'd suggest as we talk about it further here that we also note that we're addressing one side of the equation right now, but not necessarily the other that was the source of such interest over the past summer and over the year, so to speak. Thank you. That's all I have. Thank you very much, Commissioner Briggs.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commander Brockway. Gentlemen, I want to thank you all for a great presentation. Commissioner Soboroff, did you have any questions before on? No questions. Thank you, everyone in the room. Now we'll turn to item 4B on the agenda, the department's report on Public Safety Committee regarding the department's policies and training for crowd control situations. I understand that Director Rhodes will be presenting today. I'm sorry, Director Rhodes, are you going to be joined by anyone else?
Yes, actually, sorry, Chief Reyna.
There it is.
And Chief Kowalski.
Chief Reyna, Chief Kowalski, thank you for joining us. Director Rhodes, I believe we've all read the report, so if you could just give us an executive level summary, and then the commissioners can go ahead and ask any questions that they may have.
So go ahead. I'm sorry.
So I think the report was divided into three things. The Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy had the last four. Perhaps Chief Reyna could start, or if you just prefer me to start, Commissioner Briggs, that would be fine too.
If you want Chief Reyna to start, we'll start with Chief Reyna, and then you can pick up the last, as you pointed out, as it's broken out.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, great. Good morning, everybody. Like Director Rhodes had talked about, we were tasked in March of 2021 by the City Council Public Safety Committee to report back on certain items. We were able to generally put those into three different categories in three different offices: the Office of Support Services, Office of Special Operations, and Office of Constitutional Policy and Policing. So I'll start with Officer Support Services. As you can see, there's three things there with some subcategories. They're looking for a comprehensive overview of training and classes specifically related to less lethal munitions, public order policing, incident command system, de-escalation, field jail duties, along with training from the time a recruit starts in the academy right up until someone makes it to, let's say, for example, command staff. Also looking for an overview of our protocols and procedures for field jails and policy that dictates the use of less lethal tools, the authority to use them, and recommendations for stricter use. I just want to, obviously it's a lengthy report. I just want to touch on some highlights through there. With less lethal, there are 7 courses taught by our academy personnel. One of those is for recruit training. 5 are in-service training, which includes training for Metropolitan Division, and there's 1 instructor course. For public order, there's 3 total courses that are taught that are listed in the report, 1 for recruits, 1 in-service training, and 1 telecourse training opportunity. For incident command system, there's a bunch of incident command system trainings that department personnel take part in, starting with recruits. There's 1 course for recruit officers in the academy. There's 4 courses for all sworn personnel in the department. Those are ICS courses 100, 200, 700, and 800 that they're mandated to take. There are 2 additional mandatory classes for sergeants and lieutenant sergeant 2s and lieutenants. That's ICS 300 and 400. As well as ICS is incorporated into supervisor school, watch commander school, command development. And there's a course on command post training that's specific to the Office of Operation and Geographic Bureaus relative to standing up command posts and things like that that are related to civil unrest. Moving on to de-escalation, there was a tactics directive in 2016 that was published regarding tactical de-escalation techniques in 2017. De-escalation was incorporated into our use of force policy. At that time, all training curriculum and department reference material were updated to include de-escalation. In October of 2020, our use of force policy was updated to ensure compliance with Assembly Bill 392 and State Bill 230, and along with Penal Code Section 835A. De-escalation was also included in those. De-escalation is part of the curriculum for individuals who are promoted, such as field training officers, supervisors, watch commanders, detectives. It's also in our leadership enhancement and development session, command development. So we've infused de-escalation into all those trainings. Recruit officers receive 76 hours of de-escalation training. De-escalation is infused into our command and control and our mobile field force training that all department personnel are attending. It's also found in 79 department lesson plans, which includes approximately 37 training courses that are listed in the report. And de-escalation is infused into our MHIT training, which takes place 2 times a month. And currently there's been 4,400 department personnel who've attended our MHIT training. And one interesting statistic I just wanted to point out in the report was that by the end of 2020, 82% of all calls involving individuals suffering from mental illness were handled by an officer who has been certified in MHIT training. Moving on, in field jails, currently there's no standardized training for field jail operations, although it's in our jail division manual, it describes how field jails work and the roles of personnel involved in field jails. There's no standardized training. The field jail guide is being updated to be more clear and precise as to everybody's role and how field jails are supposed to work. And it is a recommendation that will be discussed at a future police commission meeting and our after action report from the Safe LA last year of developing a training for field jail operations for personnel involved. And lastly, regarding policy related to less lethal tools, our mobile field force concepts 1 and 2 training bulletins were updated to highlight that less lethal are target specific tools to be used in crowd control situations. They're not dispersal tools, and also to update the reporting procedures for the use of those during civil unrest. Our baton training directive was updated to reflect current use of force policy, and our crowd management, intervention, and control tactics directive was updated to clarify the use of the baton, the less lethal tools and documentation when it's used in crowd control situations. And lastly, one other change that occurred was a beanbag shotgun distance was reduced from 45 feet to 30 feet in that use. I just kind of quickly went through just for that section of highlights. Obviously, it's more detailed in the report regarding our training and the things that they were asking for the Public Safety Committee that we report back on. Unless there's any questions for this portion of it, Commissioner Briggs, I could turn it over to Director Rhodes or Chief Kowalski, who has the next section.
Let's have Director Rhodes or our Commander Kowalski go forward, and then we'll ask all the questions at one time.
Good morning. The Office of Special Operations was directed to outline the personnel responsible for managing emergency operations and the incident command system. The focus under Emergency Services Division was on two sections in this report. The first is Emergency Preparedness Unit. They're responsible for authoring and updating the Emergency Operations Guide. They coordinate emergency preparedness and planning activities with the city's Emergency Management Department, the Los Angeles Fire Department, and other city agencies. And they also prepare and assist department personnel with event action plans and coordinate advanced incident command system courses. So one of the points in this report was specific to the Emergency Operations Guide. To just give you a quick overview, it's comprised of 10 volumes and it's close to 500 pages in length. The EOG is not a policy, it's rather a guide for our personnel to follow. Some of the volumes include emergency operations and procedures, a supervisor's guide, first responders guide, command officer's guide, crowd management and control, mutual aid briefing, and field jail task force guide. And consistent with the 3 after action reports that occurred from the Safe LA last year, all volumes of the guides are currently being updated to reflect the current use of force directives and policy changes. And once this is completed and codified, emergency preparedness will incorporate these changes into the applicable volumes of the EOG. The second area was the Major Incident Response Team. Their responsibilities include responding to major incidents and assisting department personnel in the command and control of serious and major unusual occurrences, provide training to command post cadres to enhance their understanding of the incident command system, and evaluate after action reports to assist in future planning and training for department personnel. And as Chief Reyna mentioned, I'm prepared at the conclusion of this to address any questions you have. That concludes my portion of this report.
And so the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy was asked to take a look at the settlements from 2000 on. There were 5 of those, but 3 of them involved changes to policies, procedures, and training, and 2 were just monetary. The 3 that involved changes to our policies and training were 2 from the 2000 DNC and 1 from Mayday in 2007. I think those have been outlined, but briefly, I did want to indicate one mistake in the report. The media relations and crowd control situations is dated July 8th, 2002, not 2012. And that's a mistake in our report on page 22. Otherwise, I think that you can see the differences in terms of dispersal orders, media relations, and mostly media relations for the DNC. There's additional training on crowd control and crowd management, 10 hours for patrol and 8 hours for management. Moving on to the Mayday 2007, there is substantial overlap in some areas, such as helicopters, marches, motorcycles, bicycles, less lethal, and public assemblies, in which the department made changes to its policies and procedures, many of them in the Emergency Operations Guide, which is found, those are detailed on page 25 of the report. The council also asked for lawsuits and a report on lawsuits. As the commission knows, during closed session. We elaborated on that at the end of June 22nd. And if you would like further details or to talk offline, I can do that. The third thing that we were asked to do was look at the Los Angeles Municipal Code, section 80.2, and the arrests made for that. And that basically dovetails into the standard procedure about speaking with the city attorney. I think you will recall that there was a portion of the after action report that we spoke about in April regarding our discussions with the city attorney for arrests for failure to disperse and disturbing the peace. Those are Penal Code section 409 and 415. Those are misdemeanors. But people were released based on 8002, which is an infraction, would not go down as a misdemeanor on any criminal history. It allowed the department to release people more quickly. Those charges were all dropped by the city attorney also, and that's in the after action report. So that is sort of without repeating the report or taking undue time, those are the things that the council asked us to report on. And like my colleagues, I'm available to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Director Rhodes. Let me start off with you, Director Rhodes. As I understand it, the city and the department have entered into, over the years, a number of settlements. And I'm not referring to the monetary settlements right now. I'm talking about the settlements that require the department to, for lack of a better word, behave in a better way with respect to crowd control. And that it goes directly to use of force or use of less lethal force. When the settlements are reached and the department agrees that it will now take or not take certain action with regard to crowd control, what happens next? What does the department do to ensure that this settlement that is reached with whatever group it is that has sued the city is now something that will be implemented and is ingrained in the training and ethos of the department going forward?
So I think that's a multi-pronged answer, and I'll try to go through the different things. There are certain things that need to be changes in policies and other things that we put into either notices or training bulletins. As you, I think, will note from the report, the May Day settlement had a 4-year sort of term, but that could be extended, which was not. The department then puts into its training, its bulletins, and its policies, some of which, as you know, from your role on the commission, take longer to achieve than others. The policies go through a number of iterations and ultimately are presented to the Board of Police Commissioners. From there, prior to that, there can be notices or trainings. Depending on how complex or complicated I think trainings are, for instance, a 10-hour training might take more time to put together. None of these things have, despite the fact that the settlement may have expired, for lack of a better word, none of these things have been changed to get rid of those policies. There have been additional, we are currently in the midst of litigation over Safe LA, and we have those after action reports. All of those things move the department in the direction of more transparency and being better able to serve our community, including during unusual occurrences and First Amendment assemblies. And so I think the department understands that it needs to move forward. It has in terms of some of these settlements. It continues in other ways. And we will not be waiting for settlements to move forward in terms of what we have identified and what other after action reports, including the one commissioned by the commission, have advocated. But I think it is ingrained both by policy and by training so that the department maintains and moves forward in terms of what it agreed to in a settlement, and also things that it sees or perceives as things that need to be trained upon or acted upon in terms of a policy setting.
So Ms. Rhodes and or Chief Reyna, please chime in here. Settlement in particular. Can you hear me okay?
Sorry, I missed just a little bit of that, Commissioner Briggs.
Sorry. Arising from the May Day settlement in particular, the use of less lethal weapons on dispersing crowds. I know that there were some language that was agreed to in the settlement there, particularly when a crowd was retreating, that less lethal force would not be used on retreating crowds. So just take that one narrow issue right there. How has that been rolled out to the department, or is the department waiting for the commission to adopt a policy around that? Or are officers already receiving training in crowd control management on this particular issue?
So there were policies rolled out as a result of the settlement after May Day, including policies on crowd management and training less lethal, and that's found at page 24 and 25 of the Emergency Operations Guide, which currently is in existence. I will note that, and I don't want to preview too much because it's off topic, but we are looking at revising that Emergency Operations Guide again, based on the after action reports. So it was rolled out in terms of policy, and I believe that I will defer to Chief Reyna in terms of how it was rolled out in terms of practice. But as I said, at least there was crowd control training after the DNC, and I think it continued after May Day. Chief Reyna?
Commissioner, if I could say, I don't know specifically regarding that particular thing you're asking for, how that was rolled out, but I can generally tell you how things are rolled out if something changes. That can be a variety of things. It could be a message that goes out from our Department of Operations Center to all personnel immediately via email. It could be a message to all training coordinators that is disseminated to all the divisions through the training coordinators. If a policy is updated, such as a training bulletin or tactics directive, that can be emailed to everybody immediately, sent to the training coordinators. We also can put it in our LMS, our learning management system, and all employees are mandated to go into their LMS continuously for updates on policy and procedure, and they would have to acknowledge that new directive or new bulletin for the changes in there. So there's a variety of ways that a change in policy or procedure or something that we have to get out right away can be disseminated to department personnel right away.
And if I might add, so Commissioner, I believe what you're looking for, what your question deals with is strategically and in practice, how do we deliver training and development of our personnel? What is the oversight and insurance that settlements such as been mentioned here, or instances, whether it's observed by the department or that by the commission, as to use of force, as to crowd control tactics, crowd management, and other matters, crime fighting, community engagement, all those things. How do we go about the ongoing nature of the training and development of our personnel? And how do we take into account, including settlements? So let me frame that out really succinctly, or try to. First, Deputy Chief Mark Reyna and Dr. Luann Pinnell of Training Bureau. And those two individuals are charged with the oversight and design and delivery of our training, both recruits as well as in service, sworn and civilian, for the entire organization. And that's a historical matter that chiefs my predecessors and others have relied upon and will rely upon. With that, however, is some monitoring, overwatch, if you will, by the Office of Constitutional Policing and Policy, as well as by the Office of the Inspector General and this commission, as well as myself, so that we are in a living document sense dealing with the DNC, Mayday, lessons learned from Occupy, from other instances over the course of our history. Your point on the retreating aspect of 2007, for instance, the less lethal use of less lethal deals with that. It still is compliant, and in fact, it is my assertion, and I believe it's and will continue to assert, we did not use less lethal during the civil arrest of last year on retreating individuals. We used it on, it was deployed, and the policy was for individuals that were believed to be violently resisting or posing an immediate threat of violence or physical harm. Now, a person may be running back, maybe moving back and at the same time throwing a projectile. And someone will say, well, that person's retreating. But the ongoing threat of that violence is real. And I would not consider that person retreating. I'd consider him redeploying. But not to get into a word game, the point of what the 2007 settlement was about was that individuals that are fleeing, moving away from a police line would not be, the use of less lethal would not be to kind of push them because they're already leaving and repel them further at a heightened pace if they did not pose an immediate threat of violence or physical harm. But so we drill all the way down to that single event, but we can pull all the way back. And then over the course of time, including court settlements or court decisions, we will modify the use of force, the use of our tactics and strategies with a commitment of being staying in adherence. Now, to last close point, Ms. Rhodes, Director Rhodes references the term of the 2007 settlement was 4 years. But just as with the consent decree, which was also expired and then we exited, the department has strived to learn from those events that resulted in whether it be the consent decree or court settlement agreements and so forth, as to the underlying tenets of what was the issues at hand and how do our policies, how do our training and oversight and accountability and expectations of our people comply with that over time. And that again is a matter that I rely on, and I think the organization continues to work through is making sure that training is designed to address both what's happened in the past, but also what are emerging issues today and for the future going forward.
Thank you, Chief. I just have one last comment on the report before I open it up to other questions. And I note that on page 13, there are some recommendations, one of which is the working group. I would ask that a commissioner be appointed to the working group. A list of individuals there, some of whom are to be appointed, but I would ask that a commissioner be appointed as well.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Do any other commissioners have any questions at this time? Commissioner Bonner?
Yeah, again, I'm going to try to go to the big picture element of this. And the question really trying to understand the nature of the request and the response. And what I'm reflecting on is that there was a substantial amount of time over a couple of different meetings devoted to this, the broad topic of crowd control and the department's response to crowd control and the 3 after action reports and the 160 recommendations and all of the like. So the question really is, what is the relationship between that body of effort and the questions and information that was asked and provided, previously and the current information? So I noted the information about the settlements, was not, at least as I recall it and understand it, was not part of the earlier conversation. But most of the other information that I saw in here struck me as being directly related to the prior conversation. So can somebody, is this a follow-up to what was sent to the council before? Is it a deeper dive? Is it what, just how would you characterize that your understanding of the nature of this, this request? I know the department's role is to respond when the council asks a question, so that's the key exercise, and I respect that. But I'm just, from my standpoint, just trying to put it in perspective as to, is this additional information, or what is it?
So I'll try and tackle that question. I believe, as you are well aware, there were 3 after action reports. One was commissioned by the council, and that after action report did discuss settlements and LAMC 80.02. This then, I believe, certainly had a, certainly had sort of a follow-up kind of feel about it. But most of this, I think you are correct. A lot of this has been addressed in the multiple after action reports and is being addressed by yourself and the rest of the commission in the recommendations, the feasibility of those recommendations, the value of those recommendations. So I do believe that this is not substantially new information, but it may be slightly more information than the council had at the time.
I appreciate that. And I think a related question then is sometimes, the questions asked, information's, provided, and then later you discover some other element of information that might have been relevant, but wasn't provided because it wasn't called for in the request. What I'm speaking to specifically here, or the question is there any element of, whether it's relative to the training or any of the other work that's being done, that has some resource need or element attached to it, so that if this were sent over and the council then were under the impression that a certain level of training was continuing or accelerating, and maybe the reality is that it isn't because there's some resource constraint or some additional resources needed. And is there any of that element to this exchange of information where, there's a whole other angle of this that does that maybe should involve a discussion of resource needs, but it's not included here because it wasn't asked for?
So I would probably defer to Chief Reyna or Kowalski as to the portion that OCPP was responsible for. I think it is substantially retrospective and looking in the past. I believe that in terms of additional resources that will be needed, the prospective look on that with the after action reports are probably where we would need to inform both the Board of Police Commissioners and the council if there were some additional needs. Although having said that, I think you are correct. If something comes up as in court that you somehow missed in the report, or if the council has additional questions, resources may be needed to, facilitate those the answers to those additional questions or the request for additional training.
And if I can add, Commissioner Bonner, this report specific towards what was asked by the Public Safety Subcommittee, the after action report would be more detailed in addressing additional resource requests, additional recertifications, things that'll be happening relative to what we learned out of civil unrest, standing up maybe new units or enhancing personnel in certain things such as emergency services division. That's all been detailed in for example, in my, what we call bucket of the after action report for training. That's been detailed in there, and recommendations which will be coming through in the final report when approved by Chief Moore and is presented to the Police Commission in the upcoming weeks.
I appreciate that. I would just observe, or just close with the observation that one of the issues that we struggled with around the review of the after action reports was the process that I believe is in part underway now. In other words, when it came out, it was, here's all of these recommendations, here's the price tag for implementing everything. And that, remember, there was some controversy around at least the perception that that the department was proposing to implement every recommendation, every report for, I forget what the price tag was, but it was substantial. The interest, or at least my interest, was in having whether it's the department, the commission, somebody working to pare that down to really address, what are the priorities and to more clearly quantify what the ask, and the resource needs are around that. So I don't know whether that's, and maybe the chief has a comment about this. I assume in the next couple of weeks or at some point, this question of the budget will be coming around. And so that I'm just trying to get a feel, is there going to be some conversation around the resource needs relative to crowd control operations coming up before us? Or is that still yet something that's in abeyance?
Oh, no, great question. I think on the first page of the transmittal, under Office of Support Services, Comprehensive Overview of Training Classes, that's what's currently now. So this report is about what we're doing right now. The report that'll be becoming, the report with recommendations, including prioritization and budget, is the matter that Assistant Chief Choi will be bringing before the commission. It's expected, I believe, by the end of September. And it does go through that prioritization, and it does identify alternatives and things that we don't recommend doing. And that has also been a process of those 4 working subgroups that have also had membership from the commission on. And so that document, which is quite expansive, will be provided in advance of the commission's presentation by the department to provide time to review and digest what is a very complex conversation. And it will change. We anticipate our proposal to this commission is to change the way we go about conducting a number of areas of training and realigning some of our existing ones. So it would impact very much the information that's in here, because there's some enhancements, some modifications or change or adapting how we go about training and development and maintaining that development of our people. But this report was one of the council actions or motions, public safety, for the department to say, what are you doing today? And what's the history of that on these various subjects? What you're getting, will be coming to you next is our look and review and more detailed review and path forward on those 3 after action reports, which very much will impact the training and development of our people, which I believe is consistent with what those recommendations largely suggest.
I appreciate that. And just say, at least from my standpoint, that's the part of the discussion that I'll be very much looking forward to. So thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bonner. Commissioner Kalancho, do you have any questions? Commissioner Soberoff? Thank you, Director Rhodes, Chief Reyna, and Chief Kowalski. Really appreciate it. Thank you. Good presentation. I guess the motion before the board is that we approve this and transmit it to the City Council and the Mayor. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Motion carries. Thank you. We'll now be in recess and go into closed session, which will commence at 12:30, and see everyone there at that time.
Board of Police Commissioners will now recess into closed session to discuss agenda items 5A and 5B in accordance with Government Code 54957.
as soon as we have Commissioner Claunche, we can. Thank you, Commissioner Claunche. You are on mute.
Oh.
Thank you. Mr. Tiefenk, will you report out a closed session, please?
Sure. Mr. President, members of the commission has concluded its work in closed session. Item 5A1, officer involved shooting 047-20. The chief of police recommendations were unanimously adopted on a 4-0 vote. Those recommendations and adoptions were tactics, tactical debrief, 2 sergeant 1s, 4 police officer 2s, and 1 police officer 1. Drawing and exhibiting in policy, 4 police officer 2s, 1 police officer 1. Non-lethal use of force in policy, 2 police officer 2, 1 police officer 1. Lethal use of force in policy, 1 police officer 2. As it relates to item 5B1, chief of police complaint number 20-002890 adjudicated. That concludes the report out.
Thank you, Mr. Tiefenk. At this point, this concludes the business of the commission for today. I move that we adjourn. Is there a second?
Second.
Motion's been made and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries. Everyone, have a safe day. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Good job.